I'd like to welcome everyone back to our final panel of the day, in which we have two really interesting and important reflections that perhaps look behind the technology toward the humans and the gaze that informs AI. And our first speaker today will be Alice Joubin, who directs the Digital Humanities Institute at George Washington University. She's a professor of English, women's gender and sexuality studies, theater, international affairs, and East Asian languages and literature. She's also a faculty member of the Trustworthy AI Initiative and an affiliate at the National Science Foundation's Institute for Trustworthy AI in Law and Society. And her presentation today is entitled Anti-Asian Racism and Embodied AI in Film and Television. So I'd like us all to welcome Alexa. Thank you.
The theme of our symposium is After AI, which I find very inspiring. The word after is a preposition, an adverb, and a conjunction. It is sometimes understood to refer to a linear and temporal succession to a prior concept or event. The word after is a misnomer if used in this way in critical AI studies. It gives the false impression of a binary clarity of before and after, of then and now, by suggesting a state of being posterior to an event when a precedent is no longer relevant or a previous event has somehow concluded. With the deep social impact of AI, there can be no true moment of posterity. More specifically, the pervasive presence of algorithmic AI in racialized industrial capitalism has created internalized power dynamics between dominant and minoritized communities, as evidenced by the general public's increasing reliance on AI applications. Consumers' imagination and understanding of AI have also been influenced by popular science fiction works that depict AI either as a savior or a destroyer of humanity. These tendencies led to another sense of the preposition after. In current debates about AI's role in society, a common line of criticism is that AI is going after people's livelihood or interfering with traditional ways of life. I would suggest that we can also use the word after to evoke mimicry, imitation, and mimesis in a post-colonial studies context. Coined by Homi Bhabha, the notion of colonial mimicry refers to a strategy adopted by colonized people that imitate certain aspects of the colonizer's culture in order to survive and to reveal the flaws of the dominant culture. It can be an act of resistance. In this sense, AI's mimicry of human society is almost the same, but not quite, holding up a mirror to humanity. Building on this concept, we can do two things. Examine how AI's algorithmic representations of social patterns can reflect non-apparent discriminatory biases, or analyze how biases inform humans' own artistic representations of AI. For our purpose here, I will take the second approach to dissect unspoken biases in depictions of embodied AI. My presentation today explores the word after in a non-temporal dimension, namely derivative resemblance and adaptive imitation. I'm going to investigate representations after human traits in a subgenre of science fiction, basically narratives that feature robots, that often envision androids after the manner of humans, with identitarian characteristics derived from embodied experiences. So here are my research questions. Why does AI need to embody human race and gender rather than being presented solely as an alien, non-human entity? And how does this humanistic embodiment inform visions of an AI futurity after humanity? Psychologist Jenny Busby-Grant points out that fiction has been a key factor driving the ideas of humanoid behaviors. Indeed, AI in fiction informs real-life AI designs. For example, AI-driven voice assistants such as Siri and Amazon Alexa come with a feminine voice by default, reflecting the stereotype that women make better secretaries or simply companions. An example from science fiction is the female-voiced and corporeal AI in Spike Jonze's film Her from 2013. In her book, Anatomy of a Robot, Literature, Cinema, and the Cultural Work of Artificial People, Despina Kakudaki observes that there's a tendency to represent humanoid figures as slaves. In the British series Humans, a sentient Asian female android played by Gemma Chan is sold by a large corporation to carry out household chores. Imaginations of the non-human have a palpable impact on how people treat one another. Building on this body of scholarship and working from an archive of screenworks, I would like to delineate the intersection of racism, misogyny, and AI-driven techno-futurist Orientalism. Humanoids, created in humans' own image, enhances emotional connections with non-human entities while reflecting those feelings back to us. In this case, misogynist racism in embodied AI is modeled after human biases. For my short talk today, I will focus on a subset of these issues, namely representations of women of East Asian descent and how these depictions inform anti-Asian racism and misogyny. The well-documented tradition of using Asian-ness for ornamental value, particularly in dystopian films, gives fodder to racial hate and pejorative constructions of Asia. Contributing to the patterns that dehumanize Asian women are multiple sci-fi films that feature cyborgs and androids in Asian female bodies. The three key words here are the racist notions of yellow peril, the misogynistic idea of yellow fever, and Techno-Orientalism. Yellow peril refers to the idea that East Asian people are somehow less civilized in their cultural practices, such as what they eat, and therefore sources of diseases and social ills. The notion of brown peril related to India and South Asian countries echoes the historical idea of yellow peril. 19th century Chinese railroad workers in the US were accused of eating vermin and were associated with disease and unhygienic practices. Ironically, in the spring of 2020, Asian Americans were vilified when they wore face masks to help prevent the spread of the coronavirus, even though this hygienic practice was later widely adopted within society as a whole. The notion of yellow peril intersects with the colonial legacy known as yellow fever. In contemporary American media and popular discourse on dating, the term is used to identify and sometimes to critique the social phenomenon of white men exclusively preferring East Asian women, who are seen as passive as lotus flowers. The fetish was amplified by the US military presence in Asia in the 20th century. The fetish of yellow fever dehumanizes and depersonalizes East Asian women. If they are not identifiably individuated, they will seem interchangeable and replaceable. Yellow fever has led to the bifurcated imaginations of Asian women as either virgins or femme fatales. The misogynist and racist tendencies in yellow peril and yellow fever can be explained by this concept, the theory of Techno-Orientalism. The concept emerged with the Japanese economic boom in the 1980s, which caused what is known as Japan panic in the West. In the 21st century, the anxieties of yellow fever and yellow peril are evolving into new forms of Techno-Orientalism as Asian nations become more significant economic and military competitors with the United States. This form of Orientalism conflates automated productivity with Asian culture, such as South Korea's role in global consumer electronics and Taiwan's global dominance in semiconductor manufacturing. Techno-Orientalism imagines the racial other as robotic and less than human, lacking emotional maturity. Contributing to the patterns that dehumanize Asian women are films that feature cyborgs. So the depiction of Asian women in science fiction films reveals how racial hierarchies are mapped onto and used as justification for mistreatment of women, and misogynistic prejudices inform racism. To demonstrate how these biases work, I will use Ex Machina, directed by Alex Garland. This is a film from 2014. I'm going to use this as a case study. It is chosen for analysis because it won an Academy Award for Best Visual Effects and 73 other awards. It is considered successful critically and commercially. It has a measurable influence on discourses of AI and on the genre of science fiction. In Ex Machina, a sci-fi film about humanoids, there's a white male inventor. His name is Nathan, and he creates a series of androids with artificial intelligence and human emotions. All the androids are in sexually attractive female forms, and many are East Asian, complete with human-like synthetic flesh and skin, five senses, and nuanced facial expressions. These androids are indistinguishable from humans. One of these robots, Kyoko, played by Japanese-British actress Sonoya Mizuno, is placed in a subservient role. The socially awkward Nathan clearly creates the android to fulfill his fantasies about women. Kyoko is not only designed to do household chores like a living maid, but she also is mute without a language function. She cannot talk. In several scenes, Kyoko quietly makes sushi rolls and wipes the dinner table. The mute Kyoko prepares dishes that align with her given racial identity in Japanese cuisine, with an emphasis on sashimi and sushi rolls. Nathan specifically says that he has created Kyoko as a sex doll and as a housemaid. This pattern symbolizes the symbiotic relationship between racism and misogyny directed toward women of East Asian descent. There's an additional layer of racial tension beyond the sexualization and objectification of women. First, in contrast to the mute and docile Kyoko, the white humanoid AI named Ava, played by Alicia Vikander, is shown to be far more intelligent. She has a large range of human emotions. With full language function, Ava is very articulate and can express herself through drawings as well as speech. Neither mode of expression is in Kyoko's skill set. Ava manipulates Caleb, who is the human programmer brought in to perform the Turing test on her. Caleb falls in love with Ava and inadvertently aids in her eventual escape from the lab. While Ava obeys her creator, she's far less subservient. She does not do house chores. But both Ava and Kyoko are female, but Nathan treats them differently, reflecting racial bias against Kyoko. Secondly, historically, and in this film, racial differences have influenced gender roles and sexism. Strategies for patriarchal domination of women are replicated in the creation of racialized social hierarchies. The film reflects and critiques the stereotypes that East Asian women are dainty and more subservient. Suffering from hypersexualization at the hands of Nathan, Kyoko is a victim of both misogyny and racism. Kyoko is not merely a doll, she's also depicted contradictorily as being dangerous. Toward the end of the film, Kyoko rebels against Nathan and eventually kills him with her sharp sashimi knife. In this case, Kyoko is presented as both attractive and untrustworthy femme fatale. The main characters, interestingly, remain Nathan, Ava, and Caleb. Kyoko is presented in the film as ornamental. Adding insult to injury, most film critics overlook Kyoko as a character. The mute Kyoko doesn't have a voice in the film, and she doesn't have a presence in reviews. The spectatorial aspect of racism has both fetishized Asian bodies and erased Asian-ness from content creators' visual landscape. Filmmakers, of course, do not invent these biases out of a vacuum. Works such as Ex Machina, they project negative and superficially positive stereotypes of women of East Asian descent. The humanoids represent and resemble humans and reflect the notion of after as mimicry, as imitation. And so as a result, these representations, they expose unspoken racial and gender biases. The embodied AI bots are created after humans. Thinking through gender and race here reveals what is taken for granted and what has been hidden in plain sight in artistic sketches of AI after humanity. Thank you all for joining my talk, and here is my email. Please feel free to stay in touch.
We have a question in the Q&A for Alexa. Hugely informative and important, Alexa, thanks. General question, is it not the case that mimicry or simulation or representation can be intended and or interpreted in different ways in different situations, e.g. as compliment, patronizing, insulting, bigoted/racist, meaningless, question mark.
I agree with you that the notion of mimicry can indeed be used intentionally or unintentionally. And I think it is a challenge to discern where the boundary lies. For sci-fi movies, for Ex Machina, are we saying it is demonstrating all these stereotypes in order to critique them, or perhaps to amplify them? I find intentionality in art a thorny topic, as in the artist's intention. Regardless of intention, what is the work doing to us, for us, the impact on us? So in this case, I think the AI's mimicry has perhaps the unintended effect of making audiences uncomfortable, making them realize how these stereotypes have been operating. And the fact that this is played out by embodied AI bots, they help the perception versus played, imagine a different movie featuring only human characters. Because the lack of distance, maybe people would be less prone to enter into a metacognitive reflection.
I'm going to take a couple of questions from the chat here. First one from Retno. Alexa, sci-fi shapes how AI is designed, but those sci-fi visions are also themselves built on real-world biases and stereotypes. Rather than treating this as a chicken and egg loop, do you see any or how meaningful intervention looks like to break or fix this cycle of mutual reinforcement between fiction and AI design?
How do we break free from this? Well, create different kinds of fiction, for starters. Secondly, approach fiction with a new perspective. Indeed, sci-fi inspires real-life AI design, and then the currently available technology could inspire sci-fi writers to think of the world we may want to live in 10 years in, 20 years in, and so on, right? So after AI in the more traditional temporal sense, an obvious answer is to create different kind of science fiction rather than the current type that recycle the unproductive binaries of machines coming to save us or machines coming to destroy us. It could be more nuanced, and I imagine a type of science fiction that really takes into account disability studies angle. To rethink the able-bodied accusations of AI, since it doesn't have 5 senses. You can't do this, it cannot do that, it is not yet, and so on. Sure, I think the mileage would vary, but that kind of argument doesn't go very far, and it actually risks advertising this kind of able-bodied assumptions as if only certain ways of connecting with the world would be legitimate. Others are more problematic. For sign language users, imagine, because of the lack of speech, are they somehow less human? we have to consider all of these possibilities. So wheelchair user relate to the environment very differently, and we should begin to think of these as different channels, as different. They are different, but equal. So that's just one of many examples. Now, approaching fiction differently. How can we do that? Of many possibilities, I want to propose trans theory. So it's taken from transgender studies, but it's not really about gender anymore. To consider transience, transitory, transness in representational practices, in treating AI and fiction both as representational practices. In fact, I've been treating AI as fiction, not just because of hallucinatory capacity, but AI's operation really is transitory, as in each interaction, even if the prompts are the same, in terms of generative AI, the outputs are cognate, but ultimately different, right? And I find that fascinating. It is not it's not a Q&A box that you obtain the same results every time. In fact, results are unpredictable. They vary, and there's huge potential there for us to use trans theory, literary theory, a theory of fiction to analyze people's interaction with AI.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Before I hand back to Justin to close the session, do we have any further questions, or would either of you like to make any final remarks?
I have been thinking a lot about the use of Asian culture, Asian people, and Asian motifs in sci-fi. It is a running thread across different time periods and in so many genres. So it is a well-known phenomenon. And I thought it is ironic that the futures often looks Asian. If you follow any sci-fi film at all, you can think of any number of examples. Blade Runner, for example, and characters, they would casually be eating ramen. There would be like Asian scripts, in the background, but I don't really. They're not really meaningful in terms of the plot. So the irony is that the future looks Asian, but Asian people have been written out of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure there is. I can't think of a stark example like you presented, the Asian stereotypes.
This is actually a really wonderful segue to Leah's earlier question, which I missed. Alexa, I've been haunted by the film Ex Machina. Thank you so much for bringing this example into the conversation. What are you most encouraged by as an alternative training landscape for AI's development, considering the plurality and strangeness of nature that seems to be missing currently?
Whenever we have embodied AI in literature and in film, they tend to tell us a lot about their writers, creators, filmmakers than they do about the particular storyline. I find that despite the depressing landscape, despite the misappropriation of racial minorities, I find it encouraging that with the outsized impact of sci-fi films like Ex Machina, with their circulation, they have jump-started these discussions. If you look to discussion boards, people are passionately debating the merits and demerits of these films, even if they don't necessarily start from an anti-racist place. So I feel that more discussion is always better than people chalking it up to kind of, I don't see race. So in a way, the prominence of uses of racial minorities' bodies in embodied AI narratives, they can only be helpful in launching more discussion. I'm thinking of the Black feminist writer, Bell Hooks, who has this idea called oppositional gaze. And I have since adopted it myself, and I practice it all the time. I use an oppositional gaze to look at works that are not labeled as belonging to my community. Ex Machina, it's not for me, right? For instance. And yet I take ownership. I develop critical pleasure, as Bell Hooks says, in dissecting it, finding these. So I don't derive pleasure by immersing myself in the plot. I don't derive pleasure by following the plot per se. And I think that's where I put my hope.
Really lovely sentiment. Thank you. Oh, we have one final question perhaps that we can handle. I suppose there is the influence of the tiger economy idea and the fact that uneven and combined development, if we care for the term, results in associations of certain locations on the planet as being futuristic, ultra-modern, high-tech locations.
It's a mixture of awe and fear, and that somehow got translated and transplanted and now fermented in the domain of sci-fi. And so you keep seeing how these tropes are being recycled. The ornamental uses of Asian themes, I think, would be a bit harder for the general audience to detect and kind of think deeper about. But a film like Ex Machina, since it's embodied AI, this kind of sentient, the trope of sentient AI tend to get people to talk more about how they're constructing otherness, as opposed to, say, Blade Runner. You have Asian scripts, beautiful calligraphy, you have ramen, all this just in the background where the landscape look like some vision of Hong Kong, high rises and Bay Area. I appreciate you're bringing up the economic factor here, how it contributes to Western imaginations of certain locations as being more futuristic. Perhaps it's the deployment of technology, availability. You know that in South Korea, on average, each person has at least 2 cell phones. That's the statistics. We're talking about public infrastructure that kind of inspires people. Imagining those locations as futuristic looking, that is fine. But the other ideas deriving from that, they become very problematic.
I see both both ancient culture, craft, martial art being fetishized through the white gaze, as well as modern technology. It's interesting. You kind of get both of those tropes when you see that. Today, I'm going to just hand back to Justin to close us off, and thank you so much again.
Thanks, Tracie. Thank you, everyone. I echo Tracie's thanks to Claire and Paul for being outstanding interpreters. It's never easy to interpret an academic conference in any way, shape, or form.
Bye.
So well done. Thank you for that. Thank you as well to Aisling, Ben, Tracie, of course, and the rest of the After AI program committee for supporting last year and this year's events. And thanks to, of course, all of our presenters, Bishop, Izzy, Pete, Mihao, Retno, Leah, Grace, Alexa, Venetia. And thank you to all of you for joining us throughout the day. It's been a long, wonderful day and so inspiring and interesting to think with you all. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.